Hello and welcome back. I'm Kiana again, Kiana Brathwaite, soon to be Jennings White. There is a story behind that which I will share at a later date. Just know that I am shifting last names because I'm transitioning from one place in life to another. Now that we are in an actual module, this is module 1, I would like to introduce you to the first aspect of self that I focus on, which is self, just that. And the way that I've defined it is consistently choosing myself, happy Kiana, and putting me first. I'll give you a little brief because I've already shared the story behind the development of the 12, now 13 aspects of self, maybe 14. And so you have a little background story. Self was an aspect which, seems like a no-brainer, and yet it felt cumbersome in the beginning to focus on this, and that is why I have the definition that I have, and it's a very brief definition. It's a little ambiguous, right? But also very broad, and it allows for, to me, evolution. Where or how I defined this aspect when I first developed this practice is very different from how I relate to engage with this aspect now. And that is kind of my hope for you, that as you play around with this practice and find how it supports you and what that looks like for you, it will evolve. And it actually should. If you start something at 24, the age of 24, I don't necessarily believe that it's going to meet you the same at the age of 35 or 34, right? We shift, we change, we transition, we evolve. And so my hope is that as you define this and you play around with it, you implement the practice, see how it works for you, that you will have this evolutionary definition similar to what my experience was. Now, from a generator perspective, because I did mention that I am a generator and I use this, whereas before it was how much time am I spending, how much effort, now it's more of am I satisfied, because that's the self theme, right? Am I frustrated? That's the not self theme. And then, is it neutral? Is it in a place where it doesn't necessarily need my attention, or is it something that I'm starting to refocus on because I'm noticing that it's not getting as much attention? And so that's kind of where I am with that. How I've checked in, what that looks like, how I play with it. The activities that I would say that fall under the self theme, and I'm doing air quotes, change, right? But they're mostly, how do I pour into my cup, right? Because for me, I used to have an expectation that others would do that others would pour into my cup when I'm pouring into theirs. And I was finding that my cup was getting depleted. My cup, my vessel, your reservoir, whatever you want to call it, your chalice. And so it was this journey to discovering what is it that fills my cup, right? And how do I provide myself with more of that so that when I'm going out and giving of myself, I'm not giving from a depleted space, because that is where I used to give from all the time, was this empty vessel. I just have to, obligatory, responsible. I would show up, sometimes resentful and belligerent, and couldn't understand why I was, so miserable in these places and spaces, whether it was work, whether it was home, whether it was my relationship, my marriage, or my relationship with friends. I really started to sit with, what does this look like for me? How do I give myself what it is? What is it that I need? Not even how do I give it. What is it that I need? And then how do I give that to myself? So that's where the aspect of self came from. Now in that place, because I said it's evolved, whereas before it was how much time am I putting into it, how much effort am I putting into it. Now it's more of how am I relating to it? How am I showing up in it? Hence the satisfied, frustrated, neutral, or just starting to focus on. So play around with that. Sit with yourself. I would recommend, as an aside, just to give yourself some space to journal, right? And even before you journal, what I ended up doing, and I'll probably reiterate this in most of the modules, is I really just, as soon as, when this came up, of course, the doer in me wanted to do, but there was a being part and a sit with this aspect because I had started to meditate and practice mindfulness. So I was like, well, let me just sit with and see what comes up. And give yourself a day, 3 days, a week with this to see where you see it in your life. Right? Where does it show up? Where does this aspect of yourself show up in your life in your day to day? And then you can move into defining, understanding how you want to implement, understanding what activities support it. But first, just really see where it shows up. And that's probably going to be a consistent theme for me throughout the modules when it comes to when you're first starting to get to know these aspects and how you want to just view them and articulate them and what perspective you want to take on them. So I'll leave that there. I look forward to, and I really appreciate you sharing your time with me. I know it's precious and your attention, and I want to thank you for being on this journey. This is something that I've enjoyed playing around with, and I look forward to hearing you speaking to you in the next module. Until then.